today we are happy to introduce Chaz Martin and Don Gray, who have agreed to share their art with us in this show, Notes for Travelers. So they're just going to take it away from here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sarah.
I want to first thank Sharon and Ann and all the other folks here at the Cave for being such wonderful hosts and the beautiful curation that they did. It's an amazing treat to see your work in a space like this. So, Notes for Travelers. Don and I had a conversation 6 months ago, maybe or more. And what do we got to call this show? And I had a couple of ideas, and Don tossed back 5 or 6 great ideas. And I think I immediately jumped on Notes for Travelers, and that was it. And then a couple of days later, I had some second thoughts, and Don said, go with your gut. So we stuck with it. And I'm glad, because I think it accurately describes kind of the intersection of what we do. So every piece is basically a journey. You start with an idea, a destination in mind, and you create from there. And like any journey, there's obstacles and wrong turns and all kinds of different things that happen along the way. And when you get to the end, basically, you got a thing left over. But the real art is the journey itself. The piece at the end is just the destination for going. So I really think Don accurately described this. I'm going to let you take it from here, and then this will just be a discussion, and then it just turns into Q&A, I think, after that.
Well, like you said, Chaz, I mean, first and foremost, thanks so much to Ann John, to Sharon, to Janice, to Cynthia, to Greg, to Andrew, to everybody. That there's a real cadre or staff of people that Ann has assembled around this gallery to keep it operating and keep it operating so beautifully and smoothly. It's just one of my favorite places to be, whether I'm showing here or not. It's always, and they always do such a wonderful job of hanging the work and presenting your work in a respectful way. And it's just an honoring experience. So, so thank you again for allowing this to happen for us. In terms of the work and my process and so forth, I'm not going to try to talk too long about it, because I don't think it's that different than many. I know many of you are artists that are here, but my process is probably not that different than a lot of other artists, except maybe there's a difference between Chaz and I in certain ways. Of course, besides the 2D, 3D thing, is Chaz is never without a sketchbook, a notebook that he's drawing studies in, and he makes, yeah, there you go, beautiful, beautiful little studies that are his visual thoughts. And years ago, I started out as a realist painter, and I used to do a lot of pre-planning for paintings and do pre-studies and drawings and things. But the way I work nowadays is very different from that, and I start almost from scratch with every painting, almost. I don't have a real predetermined idea of what I'm going to do. There's two sides to that coin for me. One is exciting. It's exciting to be, you're launching out into the unknown kind of, and experimenting and seeing what would happen. The other is a certain level of frustration that I don't know where I'm going. And a painting will go through many, many changes sometimes. And sometimes it just appears quickly. Sometimes it takes months or even years. And to that extent, I'd like to talk about the big pieces that I have in this show, like that one and this one and the one called Summer Light that's on that wall around there. Those pieces were actually painted in 2019. But I have a nice studio. It's a converted 3-car garage. But and I love to work large. I've done murals and things over the years, so I love large scale. But but these paintings are too big to be stretched, put on my wall, and then where do I put them afterward? You know, and so these were painted in 2019, rolled up. They were not on stretchers. The canvases rolled up, put in the corner, and kind of half forgotten. So that's another reason why I'm really delighted to show here is that this is a wonderful space and I have an opportunity to show work that I haven't even seen myself for quite a while. And that piece in particular, I called it, it has kind of an interesting backstory. Some of you may know Bruce Jennings. He's a friend, lives in Portland. He's a real kind of a Renaissance man. He designs these gorgeous custom homes. He's an actor. He's acted in TV and I think theatrical productions and things. He's a musician. Just a real variety of things that he does. But anyway, Bruce called me up. I think this was in April of 2019. He said, I've got some new songs I'd like to try out. And he said, I was wondering if I could come to your studio and play them while you paint. And I'd never had a request like that, but I thought, well, okay, come on. And it just turned out to be a real delightful day. And so I had this big canvas on the wall. And so Bruce has his guitar and is quietly playing and singing behind me. And I'm painting away. And every now and then we would converse a little bit and then back to painting and this beautiful guitar music and soft voice lilting through the space. I play music in the space, but I'd never, had live performance. And so I roughed this painting in about an hour or so, very, very broad. I work rapidly and with big, broad brushes and strokes. And I stepped back going, well, I've done the lay-in. And Bruce said, I think maybe it's finished. I go, seriously? So we both stood and looked at it for some time. And I'm like, artists are always insecure. So I'm like, maybe he's right. And anyway, so I didn't do any more on it. It rolled up, and 4 years later, when this show came about, I pull it out, thinking, oh, great, I've got an opportunity to show it, put it on the wall and go, no, it's not finished. So more work went into the painting. But I'm pretty happy with how it resolved. But anyway, I thought it was an interesting story of kind of an unusual way for a painting to develop, for me anyway. So that's about.
I've actually taken a few of my sculptures apart in the last year or two. You finish it and you look at it and it's not quite what you wanted. And I used to just say, well, start another one. And just in the past year, it's like, well, if you don't like it, you're never going to like it. Fix it. So I've actually taken an arm off of a piece, and I took one piece off the base and threw the piece out, saved the base. But I've kind of started working more toward where you are, where just you look at it and you think about it for a while, and it could be better. So I've been letting go of that. My process is generally you start a piece and you work on it until it's done. In the last year, the piece that's on the far corner, the two figures with the flame connecting their heads, sat in my studio for 9 months with no flame. And I couldn't figure out how to finish it. I didn't know how I was going to connect them. I mean, they're connected back to back, but I had not figured out. There was just something big that was missing. And I walked in one day and what about a flame? Oh, good idea. And that was it. But that, I mean, that one sat around for 9 months. That's unusual. But when I added the flame to that, I was bothered by the size and the shape of the hands, so I cut the hands off and redid those, and I felt much better afterward.
You didn't feel like a butcher? Like a butcher cutting up these people?
Me and my wire cutters.
But I think what you're pointing out is kind of a piece that really is never really done, I think, in art for most artists in their own eyes. It's abandoned, maybe is a better word. You get to a point, with experience, you sort of learn like, okay, if I keep working on this at this point, it's going to turn into another whole painting. And, and so sometimes you feel like you're just sort of cutting your losses, like, because there's no matter how excited you might get about something, there's always this underneath, I wish it could have been a little better. I guess it's the sense of perfectionism that underlies many of us. So that again is a double-edged sword. It can kind of, it can propel you on to do better work, but it can also be debilitating if you allow it to take over too much with your work. So, the other thing that I would like to mention is I don't think Chaz and we've known each other and known each other's work for some years, and we've traded pieces. So I have a wonderful sculpture in my home. Chaz just gifted me this today, a study for that piece, which I'm delighted to have, and I'm going to hang next to the...
Study is a bit of an overstatement. It was a quick sketch on a piece of cardboard.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's directly related to the sculpture, so I'm going to enjoy hanging it next to it. But it's always... I don't think either one of us fully, until we brought our work in and until you guys hung it so beautifully, we didn't really maybe recognize connections, particularly color-wise, in the way we use palette, the way you paint your sculptures or your 2D works. Our palettes are far more similar than I realized. Yeah. And so it's fun to see two kind of very disparate sort of directions that somehow meld together. And that's a real delight for me.
When Don's work was already here, and most of it was leaning against the wall, facing the wall, so I didn't really see what was here. And I brought in boxes of pieces and miles of bubble wrap. So I'm standing here in the middle of the floor, just unwrapping for about an hour while the gallery people are just grabbing pieces and running away with them. After about an hour of unwrapping, I look up and it's like, oh my God. And Don wasn't here. So, as soon as I left, I'm texting Don, it looks great together.
Yeah. So anyway.
No one was more surprised than we were. But I visited Don's studio a couple of times, and there's a really marvelous organ art piece on him that really captures him. I mean, like he just takes a 4-inch brush and drags it across the canvas, like all the way down the wall. That's his start, and then it goes from there. When I brought some notes. When I work, it's generally, just sketches and sketches and sketches. I saw a sculpture the other day that I had seen in San Francisco around 1980 by Isamu Noguchi, who was a Japanese-American sculptor who worked in stone, worked in metal, worked in just about anything you wanted. But this one piece was called The Stone of Spiritual Understanding. The title alone is frameable. I mean, it's just, but it was displayed in a darkened room. It's a rock about this big, suspended on a glass beam, held up onto glass supports. And in this dark room, the glass disappears and the stone is levitating in space. You walk in and you look and it's like, I mean, the impact of that is still with me, and that was 40 years ago. I saw, or I was thinking about it, or I was thinking about it this week for whatever reason. I Googled it and I found a photograph of it, same piece, taken at the Japanese Garden here in Portland some years ago. And the room it was displayed in was bright sunlight. So the glass pieces were reflecting things like crazy. The levitation thing wasn't nearly as impactful as when I saw it. But as I'm looking at this, it's like, kind of looks like a figure. So I have now filled 2 books in just a week. I mean, I filled 2 of these with variations. And at first I started with a figure, hollow figure with a stone, and I thought the stone heart, no, that's a little harsh. And I kept playing and playing and playing and playing. I started building the armature for it yesterday. And at this point, it's standing on one heel, the other foot up in the air. The stone does no longer exist. The figure is holding space, and the figure has a hole in its body. It's kind of tough without a visual, but that's the starting point. And I don't go to 3D until I've seen something I've never seen before, something I've never done before, something. There's I actually wrote this down because it made more sense than, bear with me just a minute. The thought was, it's not just about making something. It's about making something meaningful. So I will sketch until I get to the meaningful part, and then I go to sculpture. And that's when the real fun begins, because that's, sculpture is just like create a problem, solve it, create a problem and solve it, and it's one after another. And it's not unlike the way you paint. You're try something, then try something else, try something else. So by the time I'm working in 3D, I think I'm dealing with a lot of the same questions, wrestling with the same kinds of issues that you do in 2D.
Right. Talk a little bit about the underpinnings of your work, the these characters, where they come from in your head. And you talked about Noguchi's influence, but there's other.
I'll try and make it short. I was in Sedona about 8 years ago. I was a watercolor painter, very traditional landscape watercolor painter. I had not done a sculpture in decades. And I was painting watercolors and stumbled across some petroglyphs, started sketching petroglyphs. And on the way back from that trip, it occurred to me what an interesting sculptural style a petroglyph might be. So being respectful to the images and not copying the images, but imitating kind of the style. And my studio mate at the time said, that's the most distinctive work you've ever done, which nobody had ever accused me of before. So it's like, I listened. I did one sculpture and then it was just nonstop. And in the process, I'm thinking about, well, you look at a petroglyph and they all look like this. But you look at it a little longer and they all have these subtle gestural differences. And I started then exaggerating those more and more and more until I get into these dynamic figures. But like a petroglyph, if you're gonna spend a week etching this thing out of a stone wall, this isn't graffiti. You're invoking the spirit of some archetypal character, some quality that figure has. So in the development of all of these, the title can evolve at any point, but what's influencing that title is like, who is this character? You know, what's the quality that I'm trying to amplify or understand myself? So there's a lot of conversations, literally, that go on between me and these characters as we're working together. And you know, I'd bend the wire this way. I mean, all of these are like, you know, many feet of wire underneath. But you know, I got the character going like this, and you're like, let's do this. No, I don't want to do that. No, what do you mean? You know, I mean, we get into that kind of stuff. But I listen to them because sometimes they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's so true. Some paint. A lot of times our artwork is a lot smarter than we are.
The
and I guess it's a lesson
to find it.
Lesson in trying to work from the intuitive response and not too much analytical thinking, because if you can think it, you've already limited it, you know, in terms of its possibilities. So that's part of the reason why I like to work rapidly, is that I'm trying to stay ahead of my over analytical brain. So I always tell people when I'm painting, really the only time I'm truly happy with while I'm painting is while the brush is moving on the surface. I love that. But as soon as I pull the brush back, click, I click over to the, you know, oh, that's not very good. And so the key is just to always keep the brush moving.
Well, there's a zone. I think every artist has been in that space at some point where you're just a conduit. You're not. I mean, you're doing it, but you're channeling something bigger than you, and it's a magical space. And when you get done, it's like, who did that?
Yeah.
If I can figure out how to stay in that zone over extended periods, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
But, you know, usually it just happens in little segments.
Yeah.
Don and Chaz, I really agree that your work goes so well together. I think it's very attractive. I have a question for Chaz. In your figures, and as androgynous as they are, do you still think of some of them as male and some as female? And if so, what are the gestures that determine that?
There are a couple, distinctly male or female. Generally, I mean, I have one in my studio right now, which is, I cast a head and hands in lucite, so they are not transparent, but translucent. And the figure is kind of palms out looking. And it's more of a female proportion figure. Why, I don't know. From the very first sketch, it just had a feminine thing to it. In general, my work is, I mean, part of the reason, I mean, I don't want to get into black, white, red, yellow, race stuff. My figures are all multicolored because they are all multiracial, multi-gender, multi-religious. You know, I want them to be as neutral as possible so that everybody can see something in them that they can identify with.
Is this a male and two females?
It kind of looks that way to some degree. I mean, it wasn't intentional to make them anything. Boy, I mean, definitely this one looks more male, for sure.
I love how those guys and girls or whoever they are, I love how they just drift in the subtle movement of the air here.
I have sketches for a 9-figure mobile, and they won't be as dynamic in gesture as these, but they will be moving in and out of conversations with each other. And I'm trying to imagine, how big can I make this?
Yeah.
And where can I get carbon fiber, because this stuff would be too heavy. And this is where, having spent a little bit more time studied math, would have been helpful. Yeah.
So you're separated wire, but what is your
The translucent piece is, it's a rice paper with a polyester fiber in it. And when I saturate it with a liquid polymer, the rice paper doesn't disintegrate. And after many more layers of polymer, they're fairly rigid.
the paint before you put
The paint comes last. The polymer is actually part of the structure. There was another question over here.
Linda?
I have a question for Don, actually.
Yeah.
You work in so many different styles, from very abstract to very realistic.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could comment on that for a minute.
Yeah, well.
What draws you to work in one way or another, and if you do them at the same time for separate shows?
Yeah. Well, I'm just, it's schizophrenia, Linda. I really didn't want to talk about that. As I mentioned earlier, I started my career, I grew up in Northeast Oregon, went to college over there. Probably was 18 years old, I discovered the work of Andrew Wyeth. And growing up in a rural environment and everything, it just plucked my strings, you know. And Wyeth became my idol, my distance mentor. Actually, when I decided I was going to try to paint full time, I actually flew back and met him and visited with him and had had some conversations with him and some letter exchange over the years. He was really helpful and encouraging in getting me started. But at any rate, so I was doing these Wyeth knockoffs for a number of years as a young painter, and then trying to develop my own style. And so the process of that helped me train my eye and my hand in those classical or traditional techniques. And I think once you have those, they're kind of in you, you know. But it was around the mid-'80s when I realized, while I was doing a little watercolor, I realized, well, this is a pretty good watercolor, but it doesn't feed me anymore. It doesn't take me anywhere else. It's sort of technically fairly sound, and it's not the best watercolor ever painted, or not the worst, but I recognized that I was no longer, it was the style that I was working in, the methodology that I was working with, I was starting to kind of outgrow, I guess. And so that led to a real process of change that happened with first recognizing it, and then, well, what am I going to do about it? And the way I decided to get out of it is I'd always painted things that I saw around me, what I came upon, but I'd never really set up like still life situations or artificial situations to paint. And I thought, well, maybe that'll be something different. So I set up this still life with some objects, some pottery and things we had around the house in the studio, and thought, well, I'm just going to work on this for 4 months. I think I committed myself to, or 6 months. Even if it kills me, no matter how bored I am, I'm going to see if this will take me somewhere. And so it ended up, this was back in 84, and it ended up being the only piece I did that summer that really, really intrigued me. And it was still very highly realistic and all, but I'd spent weeks and weeks working on this, and my mind was going other places, I think. So it led to a whole series of work. Well, those 3 vessels that are up on the, I call that the cave part of the cave on the black wall, are really an extension of that beginning. I've never really quite left that in a ways. The real objects that I was painting, gradually I didn't need them any longer. I'm like painting imaginary vessel forms or imaginary form. It was more of a journey into my own imagination. So that process really, in a way, still continues today. It was real instrumental. However, like you say, I never quite fully leave something either. I did a group of, every now and then I go back and, I guess you say, I'm going back in a way, when I go back to the realist kind of style. It's comfortable. It's goal oriented usually. I mean, you're painting something, you're painting a tree or a person or something, and you see what you're working on and where you're going, and there's a certain comfort in that. So to me, it's kind of like settling back in an easy chair in a way. And I can work. We went to Paris and went to France about a year ago, and when I got back, I wanted to do some realist paintings of like visual diary of my memories from the trip. So I did a series of half a dozen or so paintings, quite realistic, and I loved it. I loved doing it and enjoyed it. But then at a certain point there, after about the sixth one, I'm like, same thing again. I can't stay here, you know. Much as I love it, I can't stay here. I have to go elsewhere. So I don't know if other artists. I'm sure other artists have experienced this kind of paradox, but it's not always a comfortable place to be. But it's me, you know. Like I say, schizophrenic kind of existence, because I love lots of different ways of working and thinking about working.
I've described Don to friends of mine as a deep thinker with a playful spirit, which when I think what first attracted me to his work was very similar to what I'm trying to do with my own. It's you're trying to find this responsive chord, this elemental aha, and anyone who looks at it comes away with some deep, visceral reaction. And I started out as a psychology major, or thinking I was going to major in psychology, because I was always fascinated with the way the mind works and the symbols that the mind is attracted to, and the kinds of reactions that colors, shapes, and even landforms do to your soul when you look at them. And somewhere in all of my pieces, there's like, you know, what I'm going for is that instant, that moment of reaction. And everybody reacts differently. Everybody has a different experience, a different pattern, different connotations that they project onto the piece. And that's always amazing to hear what other people see. This is never what I see. But the idea is that for that instant, the piece has engaged you on some level that is not the future, it's not the past, it's this moment. And if, like Noguchi's piece, if that moment lasts for 40 years, that's an incredible piece of art. I don't know if I've ever hit that nerve yet. I don't think so. But
Question for both of you: when you're thinking about, okay, there's a change going back to what they thought they saw, or vision.
I don't know if you've noticed, several of our pieces have words in common in their titles, and that's
Who knew? Well, yeah, titling is sometimes I think, well, it doesn't matter, and other times I think it matters a lot. And I give a lot of thought actually to titling, because for a couple of reasons. One is that I do want a title that has a certain level of, I don't know, poetic resonance or relationship to the painting in a way, but without being explanatory. And the last thing I want to do, it kind of is sort of like tip my hand in a way about what I think about the painting in a way, because I think that you can be overly influenced by a title. You know, you can look at it and go, "Oh, I get it now. I understand what that painting means." You know, and we're puzzle solving animals, I guess, and we have a tendency, all of us, to want to understand or think we've got a handle on whatever we're looking at. And in the art making world, that's almost death in a way. You know, you just don't want that to happen. You don't want your work to be corralled and explained away. If you can explain it away in words, why am I bothering with paint? You know, you're trying to get to something that's more, for lack of a better word, poetic, or less defined in those kind of concrete terms. So a title, I like a title that sort of implies that without describing too much. I don't know how you feel about it, but I think it's similar.
Similar. I've always been a huge fan of Rene Magritte, who didn't consider himself a painter. He considered himself a philosopher who painted. And what I love about his works, his images have this commanding power. It's like the image makes a statement, and then it comes up with a title from left field that makes a completely different statement. And you're in the middle, and you're part of it. And you have to triangulate, like, what's he mean? What's going on? And when that happens, you're totally engaged. I mean, that's it. That's it. I think I do something similar. I mean, I have working titles for pieces, and sometimes the first title is the last. Sometimes it goes through several. This large piece in the back, the smaller version of that, a 20-inch version of that, I titled Binary Orbit. I was reading books on physics, not that I understand any of it, but I like to scramble my imagination, and that's a great way to do it. And the idea of a binary orbit are two planets that influence each other. And that's what I was thinking when I did this. And then at some point, somebody said, you know, binary has other meanings, and it kind of changed my whole perception of the piece. So I didn't rename that one, but when I did the 6-foot version, I gave this one a different name, which is Unspoken. So that's an example of where, you know, the sculpture's doing something and the title's doing something, and you figure it out.
Well, this piece, for instance, I called Canyon Wind. I think that's probably almost more explicit than I usually am with a title. But and it wasn't that I was really thinking of a canyon while I'm painting this abstract painting. But at a certain point in the process, it just felt like a canyon with wind blowing, the direction, the movements and things. So, you know, so maybe that title is a little over-explanatory in my terms, but I think it's fairly accurate. Yeah, sometimes I experiment with my kind of limited palette, but most of the time, no. I have about, I'd say, 12 to 14 colors that I generally squeeze out on my palette, and I have no compunction about dipping in any one of them at any time. It just I didn't think of myself as a colorist coming out of that Wyeth background with very limited color, and I emulated that for a long time. Thought for a long time that I'm not about color, but I think I am about color now, and that's been an evolution. But I don't think about color analytically or about. I guess intuitively you do. Like I'll think about what is harmonious or deliberately not harmonious, or I know you know, the basics of a color wheel and how colors interact with each other. But I use them very freely, and then if I don't like it, I just change it. You know, it isn't a thought out process.
I think we're similar in that too. I studied visual communication. Most of my early career was in advertising. I didn't have any real training in painting or any. I think I took one class in color in art school because it was required. Since then, it's, according to my wife, I'm colorblind because I can't tell green from brown socks. So I go for bright color, I guess. I've just always been drawn to vivid color. I mean, like, why not? You know, color's color. Use it. You know, enjoy it. I think I was influenced by the Impressionists in that I will use multiple colors of a similar value, and that really excites your eye when you see it. And you contrast that with something completely different, and that excites your eye. And so this is in visual communication, you want to hold someone's attention for as long as possible. So I think that's what influences, to a degree, how I treat color. The longer you look at it, the more color you see. And I have one of Don's urns over my fireplace, and I look at it every day. And I look at the way he has used color, layered color, juxtaposed color, and I know that's influenced me. I think there's a similarity there in that as I'm painting, I'll start with an idea and just start. Usually the first color I put down is not the one I'm after. I'll paint all around it until I finally catch up. But I'm also not opposed. Well, I'll just paint over it, start again. It's not working. It's pretty intuitive.
Bigger the better. I buy big rolls of canvas, and I really just kind of have to keep myself in check because I do love working large. And it's I painted murals. I've painted murals for about 16 years. Almost every summer was spent traveling all around the country, painting most of the outdoor murals. Some of them were like, I think the largest was about 175 feet long and 25 feet high. And, so it's scaffolds or lifts and big quantities of paint and big gestures, which I just love. I love the physicality of that. Even though the subject matter that I was painting, I thought of it more illustrative. It was usually like regional history scenes or things like that, realist kind of work that I wasn't really invested in emotionally particularly, but the process I was invested in, and I remain so. So I just still like that physical process of scale, and it feels like a big canvas gives me room for my ideas or my intuitive motions or whatever. And I have to scale that down for smaller work and try to find another understanding of that for small scale. And I like both, but the big pieces, I just all roll out a big piece of canvas and just arbitrarily decide this is going to be a big square or maybe it's going to be this wide. Tack it up on the wall. I have a large plywood wall that I built. It's just what I paint on, and I go away at them, work away at them, but they, like I said, I have to kind of restrain myself with that because it's tougher. Where do you put them? Where do you sell them? They're more challenging in lots of kinds of ways that way, just logistics way. So again, that's why I'm really delighted that I have the opportunity to show them here, because otherwise, I didn't realize it'd been that long. 4 years ago, I did these and they'd never been shown. You know, it just rolled up in the corner of the studio. And so it's great when you have an opportunity to show them. And if anybody has a great big wall, let me know.
When we were paired together, my first thought is, oh my God, all my stuff is like this scale. And that was, what, 7, 8 months ago. So that gave me some time, and I started thinking bigger. And I had never done a mask 4 feet tall before, so that was pretty exciting. I mean, the mobile, I don't know where that idea came from. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. And I knew that I wanted to do a 6-foot sculpture for this show. And I went through, I don't know how many sketches. And the whole time I knew the technique I was going to use. It's a welded steel armature. It's architectural foam, which is adhered to the armature and then carved, and then fiberglass layered over that. So I knew that was the technique. And I'd never done that technique before. So I knew I didn't want to do anything with hands or anything delicate. So I avoided hands and feet. And I went through lots of different ideas. And finally, the original of this was several years old. And one day I just looked at it and said, no, that's the one I should do. It's going to be the easiest one to execute. I lost 5 pounds working on that one. Because of the physicality. I mean, it's the carving something that's as tall as you are is a lot different than shaping something like this.
How come that doesn't work for me on my big painting?
I have this piece on this corner is my next 6-footer, and I'm debating whether it should be 6 feet or 5 because I have a finite amount of foam left to work with, and I figure I can just make it at 6 feet. But the other day I have another hanging piece. It's a single figure, and initially I had a ring of hands suspended on a wire around it. And the hands were too heavy and the wire wasn't strong enough, and the wire kept sagging into an egg shape. And then the thing, because I didn't tie a very good knot, fell twice. So I thought, well, maybe it's not a hanging piece, but I had a visitor in my studio the other day, and I thought, well, I'll just hang it up, just because I don't want it laying around. And the minute I put it on the wall, I grabbed a piece of paper and I drew out and cut out 8 hands that are about life size, and I taped them to the wall. I thought, I could carve those out of the foam if I make that 5 feet instead of 6. So I'm negotiating for resources. I think that's the way I want to go right now, though. Because engineering this thing to be with the hands floating in space, I think is, it's fallen twice. That's a hint.
You have more ideas than your life is going to last for putting this, for thoughts for how to work and what to work. And what to do.
I have no shortage of ideas. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's a high density urethane. It's 8 pounds per cubic foot, so it's heavy, and it carves like a giant hard apple. And it sounds like an apple when you're slicing through it. I used a fillet knife, a fishing knife, to do most of the carving, and it was just fun. It was fun.
You had another.
I did. On a piece that's this big, you use a correspondingly big palette. I mean, how does that work? How does that physically work?
The bigger paintings are acrylic out of, I work with oil too, and I love oil as well. But the bigger paintings tend to be acrylic because, like I say, I put them on my painting wall that they're going to be there. I'm not going to be doing too much other work other than on a tabletop and smaller scale things. But so I need it to dry fairly rapidly so I can roll them, like I say, or whatever, move them around. So the acrylic palette that I use is actually developed out of my mural work, because I have this old it's just a storage box, a plastic storage box about this wide, and
There's a photo on your video of that.
oh yeah, okay. Is there? Oh. Anyway, I still have the same one because I just love how it works. I've never found one quite like it, and it's all duct taped up. It's been beat up. I've been on multiple scaffolds all over the place. But basically what it does is I buy these dollar store little, what would they be, pint-sized square plastic things. I use a Nova color, which is a pourable acrylic, and I fill up these cups with, you know, that full of these little 4-inch square, and they fit just in this thing just perfect for about, I think it's 14 or 12 of these cups fit in there. And it's a portable palette. And I use the lid I flip the lid over, and then it's kind of got a trough, and I use that as a mixing place. So basically the paint is in quantities where I can dip in with a big brush and lots of paint, you know. Yeah. The oil palette is less that way. I'm still using mostly the time squeezing paint out onto a glass palette, pretty good sized chunk of glass. But any other questions?
One more for Chaz. Sorry. I just have a quick one for Chaz. I'm sitting here also with my book. You seem to have two different ones. Do you have writing in one and drawing in another, or they go back and forth?
I ran out of pages, so but normally, I have 4 or 5 sketchbooks going at once, and an idea will move from one to the next. And my normal process is I open the book and I start sketching. And after a few pages, I'll go back to the beginning and see what else I had sketched. And it's like, well, what if I combine this with that? And that feeds the next sketch, and that feeds the next sketch. So I'm leapfrogging. And then I open the next book, and there's that same idea again, juxtaposed with something different. Well, what if I do this? So, I mean, what if, what else, and why not are like the eternal questions that I ask on every single sketch. And the idea isn't to make a masterpiece. It's what else can I do with this idea? And I mean, this is the stone of spiritual understanding, and it would make a great stop frame animation, which is probably what's going to happen to it.
You should do that, yeah.
It's unusual for me to have one idea almost exclusively from start to finish in one book. I don't think like that either. It's just everywhere. Anyway, if that's it, thank you.
Thank you very much.